Oh, the barnyard is busy in a regular tizzy, and the obvious reason is because of the season. Ma Nature's lyrical with her yearly miracle. Spring, spring, spring.
Hi, welcome to Hisato's musical extravaganza. Today we have, in addition to Hisato Masuyama, our resident expert in American cinema from a Japanese perspective, we have Justis, who knows everything possible about home video formats. So today we're going to be discussing Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, partially because of the fact that it's one of those many films that is considered controversial when it is shown on TCM. And I want to discuss why that is, and what we all think of that particular black mark against it, if you will. So let me start by tossing this to Hisato. Hisato, can you tell us a little bit about why you in particular loved Seven Brides for Seven Brothers?
Well, for starters, grandmother had a 78 RPM record of Going Courtin' and Lonesome Polecat, and I loved the record so much, especially when the record label said Going Gotten. They misspelled it in Japanese press. Anyway, and to I did not know that it was a movie. Obviously, I was 4 years old, right? And back in 1975, as I recall, grandmother and my sister went to the United States, and she bought me records. And I asked her if she could find the record of Seven Brides, and she did. And I've just fell in love with the soundtrack, of course. It's one of those glorious MGM musical double disc set, in conjunction with Rosemary, another CinemaScope movie, which we're going to discuss later because it's the first CinemaScope film that MGM ever made. Anyway, besides that, then it was on television in 1976 in Japan, and I just could not get enough of it. I loved it so much, and I think it's because the element. I was 11 years old, and I'm looking at the plot, going, okay, it's about these six starved men, and these seven six-starved women going at each other. And unbeknownst to myself, I think it just spoke to my brain. I don't know what it is.
I'm going to start calling you sex-starved Hisato.
Thank you very much. Coming from you, it's a compliment.
Speaking of sex-starved.
So Ty, tell us what made you love the movie.
It's interesting, and I think it's one of the film's saving graces, is the fact that it is an original musical, but it's based on something else. It's based on the rape of the Sabine women. It's kind of based on Roman history that was mythologized over time, and it became very popular during the Renaissance with a lot of artists and sculptors. I think that it's interesting in that respect because when you think of musicals, you just think of singing and dancing, and not really having historical significance. But this one kind of does. And as to the question about it being troublesome or having a black mark on it, I think that kind of helps because it wasn't originated at MGM when they're like, we're going to make this movie about these men who kidnap these women and all of that. I think it has a greater historical context in the fact that it's an adaptation of something that is an historical event, depending on who you ask or who you read, Plutarch or any of other Greek philosophers at the time. But it fascinates me that it is a film that has certain ties to television and the significance of widescreen in general, because it was a CinemaScope film, and I think at its widest when we look at the anamorphic version, it's 255, right? It's original CinemaScope, because it was like, I think original CinemaScope was 255 until like 1955 or 6, and this came out in 54. But the interesting thing about it is that it's, for me, one of the interesting aspects of it, besides the story, is the fact that it was shot in two different ways. It was shot anamorphic 255, CinemaScope 255, and 4:3 matted to 185. So there's a flat version and an anamorphic version. And thinking about having to film something twice, or at least with two different cameras at the same time, with two different compositions, with two different lens technologies, because it's all different, and they all have their different problems. what we think of as lens flares as being kitschy and just inherent to anamorphic technology was looked upon as more or less like a mistake. They were looked like as more errors than they were something cool to see in a movie. The way J.J. Abrams has almost, fetishized lens flares. But when it comes to the film itself, the complexity of a musical, for anybody who knows the behind the scenes of any musicals or who has actually been in a musical, I have, and performed on stage and doing all that, having to do things in one take, which some of that film was actually done in one take. It's astonishing that not only would they have to film that, get it right the first time, but shoot it with two different cameras with two completely different sets of issues that could come up. So I always found that fascinating about that film, and a couple of films that had that same setup, that two camera setup, like The Robe, when they first started, and apparently a year later when they were shooting Seven Brides for Seven Brothers.
Along with this film,
I came to the movie through I Love Lucy. And there was an episode of I Love Lucy where they're in the Swiss mountains and Lucy makes noise and they get buried in an avalanche. And because of that, I was always interested in seeing the movie. And that's what actually started it for me. And I remember really, really liking it. But at that time, I was more interested in only watching things like the Judy Garland musicals and all that. So I didn't appreciate it as much as I would many years later. And Hisato is one of the reasons why I came to go from thinking of, well, that's a good movie, to absolutely appreciating it for what it tried to do. I find it's also interesting with the reputation it's getting right now, because it's not just Seven Brides for Seven Brothers that has that problem. It's virtually every single Stanley Donen movie. Every single one of them has a problem with treating its female characters perhaps not as well as our eyes today would like to see it. Look at Singing in the Rain and how it totally demonizes Lena Lamont, while the girl who pops out of the cake and is kind of a prostitute is celebrated as she's sleeping with the star. And so because she's sleeping with the star, she's going to get a career. And look at Funny Face. You have Audrey Hepburn being this kind of naif who believes in philosophers, and then she's almost raped by one until the photographer, who's got the hots for her, even though he's old enough to be her grandfather, ends up marrying her. And that's carried through with his dramas as well. Look at Two for the Road, where you have Audrey Hepburn's minor affair with a guy being this huge plot point, while we see Albert Finney, while he's on a road trip, having sex with some floozy who is driving next to him. There's a thing like that runs through Donen's work, and I think that combination is one of the reasons why this movie gets looked at in a way that's perhaps more so than some of the other films that were concurrent with it.
Interesting.
Well, much like even in Town, when Betty Garrett is the man-hungry, sex-starved taxi driver, and what's her name? And Gene Kelly just nothing but sexually obsessed with Vera Ellen. That's all that's to it, and that's how he gets her. And Am Miller is obsessed, historically perhaps, but sexually obsessed with Jules Marchand because of how he looks. There's nothing underneath it. It's and they make it into a light, frothy comedy. So I think that has something. That film has the element of what you were talking about as well.
It's interesting because I was watching Charade, Stanley Donen Charade, and I was listening to the commentary with him and the writer, and it was funny because there's a portion of it where he's commenting on Cary Grant and what Cary Grant said, because Cary Grant told me, he goes, I don't want to chase Audrey Hepburn. He goes, I know it's obscene. I think it's obscene. And, and what he meant and what they translated and what he meant was, and it was something that Cary Grant brought to their attention because he turned 60 years old when he did Charade in 63. And he told them, he goes, yeah, it's obscene. She has to chase him. I don't want to run after, well, he said, I don't want to run after her. I don't want to be running after someone that young at my age. And he didn't mean that he was just too old to run, but he said what he meant was that it was obscene for someone his age to be coming on to someone her age, but that her coming on to him would be more an acceptable plot, whether he's right or wrong. But he, even in his own eyes, he goes, I'm too old to be hitting on girls that young. I would like for her character to kind of chase me a little, and maybe if it's her basically giving her consent, giving her the power to chase him, it would be more acceptable and more appropriate. And it was something that Stanley Donen, I guess, didn't realize himself, but they kind of went with that to a certain degree. And this coming from a director who's been married, was married 5 times himself, and was chasing women even up until through his 80s. And it's interesting to hear his point of view when it comes to something like that. He didn't judge Cary Grant's motives, but it was just an interesting point, I thought. Speaking of what we're speaking about now, I didn't really kind of put 2 and 2 together, but that's he and that goes to another thing when it comes to women and men in the business. Men have to they have to tell their directors, I'm too old to do this anymore. Women don't get that chance. It's very interesting to me, but that's a topic for another day. But it's interesting how, like, George Clooney retired. He's like, he kind of said the same thing. I'm too old to be playing the love interest. And Roger Moore said the same thing too, that it's like, I'm paired up with women that are young enough to be my granddaughter, because it's just not appropriate to play Bond anymore. But when it comes to something like this, like I said before, I think it being a representation of something else, and if people would see that, I don't think it'd be as, I guess the depiction is a little off-putting today, but like Dan said, that's kind of most old films, and especially films when the men are relentlessly pursuing the women.
Well, if you think about most screwball comedies, they're stalker stories. You could take Godfrey and say that My Man Godfrey is merely a pre-make of Fatal Attraction, because Carolyn Bard is stalking William Powell.
That's true.
And Bringing a Baby, same thing.
Yep. Very
Which
much.
one?
Bringing
a
Baby.
Bring a Baby.
The pre-make of What's Up, Doc, basically.
Yeah. That's that's the funny thing. And I feel this way. I don't know if you guys feel this way when you watch things like, and I brought this up before, because I always talk about films that get banned, but we still promote Gone with the Wind like crazy. And I love Gone with the Wind, but there's a part of me that every time I watch it gets a little more cringy. I'm like, but is that because it is? And then I kind of take a step back and go, like, am I judging it from the wrong perspective? It was wrong then, it's wrong now, period. I get that. I'm of the idea that it should all be released anyway, and we should have conversations about it as to why it's inappropriate, but still understand that it's a product of its time, and better than ignoring it. It's better to just kind of bring it out there, talk about it, discuss why it's wrong, even though it's uncomfortable. It makes us uncomfortable for a reason, and it's important to feel uncomfortable when it comes to this stuff.
Well, also remember that the NAACP was very involved in the production of Gone with the Wind, and that's the reason that the Black characters are never referred to as slaves directly. Yes, you have that crawl at the beginning that's really cringy, and you also have that line with Leslie Howard when Scarlett says, "You weren't troubled thinking about owning slaves." That's not Scarlett being insensitive to the Black characters. That's Scarlett calling Leslie Howard on his BS. Because by that point, we've seen that Scarlett was actually a Frankenstein monster creation of Mammy. Here's Mammy, who spends her entire time wanting to be in the house, and she has no rebelliousness in her because it's been quite literally beaten out of her system. But because she is trusted with raising the white folks' daughter, look what she does, and she promotes every single kind of naughty thing Scarlett does, such as when she's going after Frank Kennedy. You see Mammy knowing what Scarlett is planning and saying, I'm gonna help you. It's more explicit in the book, but Mammy knows that her fortunes rise and fall with Scarlett, and Scarlett on her part brings Mammy, Prissy and Pork with her to Atlanta. And you notice that when we see them, Pork later on is dressed very nicely. Mammy is wearing nicer and nicer clothes. There's a real sense of kinship there. And why does Scarlett bring Prissy? You would have thought that after the birth and babies thing, Scarlett would be like, forget it. But no, Scarlett was mad at Prissy, because Scarlett hits everybody. But Scarlett was mad at Prissy because Prissy showed Scarlett everything she had done. Scarlett spends her entire time lying. And then the one time someone lies to her, she sees the consequence of it. But guess what? They both successfully deliver Melanie's baby. And that's why Scarlett brings Prissy. She doesn't want to leave Prissy with those two awful sisters of hers.
So do you think in analyzing and in analyzing the film then from that point of view and that perspective, we may have talked about this before, I'm not sure, because I've heard that about the Mammy character before, Hattie McDaniel's character. Now, in your eyes, would that make her more of a villain since she created that monster? And do you think it creates less sympathy for the Black characters in the film?
Remember that Gone with the Wind is not about the Civil War as much as it is about the Depression. That's the whole reason it was published. Trust me, if in 1926 that publisher of Macmillan had come by, they would have said, oh, no way, no one's going to buy a Civil War novel. But by the time they were in the middle of the Depression, and here's Peggy Mitchell sitting there pitching the book, all of a sudden the agent saying she survived a devastation of her life. Look at how many people have survived by that same kind of pluck, the Depression. And so there was that kinship. It was because of the Depression that the book became a hit. It was because of the Depression that the movie was a hit. And Selznick was very sensitive. All you need to do is look at, and this is not saying Gone with the Wind is fine because these others are worse. No, they're all bad. But if you look at something like Jezebel, or you look at something like Little Foxes, two major Bette Davis movies, are far more pandering and far more cringy to our eyes today than Gone with the Wind is. Because Gone with the Wind, where are the other servants, Mammy? Not where are the other slaves.
Right.
So it's still a problem. But there was actual negotiation on Selznick's part. It was also the first movie where you didn't have segregated restrooms, and part of that.
That's right.
This is also urban legend creeping in, but there's the urban legend that it's because Clark Gable was part Black, because his grandfather, I think on his father's side, was one of the members of that Indian tribe which had actually owned slaves. And so it was an Indian and a Black woman who was Clark Gable's grandmother, and so that's why he was so sensitive to those issues, and that's why when the Coconut Grove was trying to say sorry, this is segregated, and Clark Gable said, okay, I'm not coming either, and I'm going to say why I'm not coming. That's the urban legend behind what really happened.
Wow.
And it does actually make sense of in terms of Hollywood at the time, and it also makes sense because Gable was able to get the Black actors to come to the Atlanta premiere, and Hattie McDaniel Wise says, "Oh no, we don't want to do this."
Right.
Because then we're real in Jim Crow land, and we're going to go into white only. This is not going to be good. You're
not going to end well. Yeah.
The Academy Awards in Coconut Grove, you could do it in California, because after all, Hattie McDaniel was paid more than any of the supporting people. She was almost paid as much as Vivian Leigh.
Wow.
So that's how valuable Hattie McDaniel was. She wasn't treated badly by that, in terms of money, by that movie. I think she got more money than Thomas Mitchell.
Oh, wow.
Really? Well, she wasn't a lot more of the film, but yeah, wow, that's amazing.
Amazing.
Wow.
I mean, I'm talking about her weekly
right.
salary.
Right.
So there was a lot of the movie does have its cringy elements, just like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers does, but when you put it in the context of what was being done then, and certainly this whole idea, well, you know what, that's an original sin, so therefore the movie shouldn't be seen, that's just stuck in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. Well, me, we've had this conversation before, and I think it all should be out. We have had this conversation about Song of the South, and we've had this conversation about the movies of that type that people try to just kind of like, just kind of push to the wayside. The Mammy character, the blackface gags from the Tom and Jerry cartoons, which is why the second volume of the Blu-ray was never put out. That had a huge, and that ticked off just about everybody. There's a lot of this, and I chalk it up to revisionist history, because that's what it is when you're suppressing this stuff, when it can have positive connotations, because the more we sweep everything away, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, Gone with the Wind, like I said, I have problems with Gone with the Wind. I still love Gone with the Wind for a lot of reasons, but at the same time, it is problematic when it comes to certain elements that we're much more, that at least we're a little closer to now, and that we can kind of see more clearly now and understand. I think that putting those films away is not going to do anybody any good, and it just helps kind of erase the fact that it ever happened. And people going, "Well, that never happened," show me proof, and then we're not going to have any proof.
Remember,
my problem is the thing is that if you sweep away history, then idiots in the future are liable to repeat them if we don't have the history.
Those who failed to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Yeah, that's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree.
Also, Gone with the Wind, the movie, is closer to the start of the Civil War than we are to Gone with the Wind. So with that in mind, when people are complaining about it, you realize how long ago that was.
Yeah.
And you realize that if you look at books that were written at that same period, or you look at books that were written 80 years before, like contemporaneous with the start of the Civil War, you're not going to have anything from that time. You think Uncle Cabin would be printable today? No.
Tom Sawyer, or Tom Sawyer. A lot of these, classics. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. No, I mean it's one of those things where it's uncomfortable, but like I said before, it's uncomfortable, but it should be uncomfortable. It should start these conversations we didn't have before. Not that we need to. The conversation should never be, we should just forget about it and let it go. Everybody wants to move on, but you can't move on until you acknowledge it. And once you acknowledge it, you kill the elephant in the room. And then you get past and understand it as a quaint little piece of Americana from its time, or wherever the film may have been produced, whatever film we're talking about that is. But with Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, again, it's one of those things that sparks an interesting conversation, but it also needs to spark a conversation of the history behind it, I think, which makes it sting a little less in that context, and helps you understand why it was made, and the fact that it wasn't just a bunch of horny guys, from the 50s coming up with this movie in a small office smoking cigars.
Well, also,
interestingly,
and they may have been part of it, but that wasn't the only reason this film was made.
Interesting. I thought that the abduction scene is done comically, which is great. It's a comedy scene, and then the girls on the while they were like holding the girls in the carriage, I'm thinking, okay, there are a lot of things that they could have done to escape, but in the meantime they didn't want to because they really wanted to be abducted. I don't know. And then when they get there, they start to do stupid things like throwing snowballs with rocks in them and stuff, and pouring water on top of them, and making them catch cold. And they do all that stuff. And is that all you can do, ladies? Is basically what probably the female population would think. Is that the only vengeance that you can think of? Could you think of something more maniacal? Well, this is a musical comedy. You can't do that. But then again, they're like, they're expected to be poked, basically, in the next few months anyway, by them. So that's why they won't do anything rash. And the kicker is that, the reason why the movie worked so well was because of one line, mine, at the end when the Reverend asks, whose baby is it? Whose is it? And they all want to stay and they all want to marry, so they say mine. And is it long enough for them to have a baby? Let's see. Let's say that this avalanche is October, right? October, and then November, December, January, February, March, April, May, 7 months.
Interesting thing, it's interesting. Yeah, they're painted as not really wanting to escape after a while, but wanting to punish the guys. And I think it's kind of goes back to 50s idealized frontier women, because if we're talking, if you made this like a horror comedy, it'd be very interesting to see these women in a cabin with these guys. Like, can you imagine like the darkest comedy, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers by Stanley Kubrick or something where like you stuck, all of a sudden there's this avalanche and all of a sudden like you're not in there. No, they're not in there with you. You're in there with them. It's great,
What I find interesting about it too is Jane Powell. Look at how she is when they first come back with the woman. She is horrified. Mm-hmm. She actually tells Howard Keel, you're off limits. I am not going to sleep with you because of what you did. And she makes sure that the brothers suffer for it as well, that there's a consequence. She's the voice of morality. These are guys who grew up with no education. It's not as if they went to Harvard and did gender studies classes. They were in the mountains, and this was territory time. And most of the time, the most expensive building in town was the saloon whorehouse. So the men of this period were not refined. And the fact that Howard Keel is refined enough at the beginning of the movie to go after Jane Powell the way he does, I think makes him admirable. The fact that he wants to bring a civilizing aspect, and the fact that he does do her wrong by not telling her that, oh, you're going to be housemate to 7 guys.
Yeah.
But look at what she does. She goes, all right, this kind of sucks, but I'm going to make the best of it. That scene where she's thinking about it, and then she goes, no, I'm gonna civilize these guys. And a single woman with all of those men who are all really kind of burly, she tames 7 guys, all 5 foot whatever she is. I find that to be a real triumph of the female power.
It is, and that's also why it works. Because usually if that was done to a woman, guess what? She would have run away right after she says, can I have to pull
and cut you.
Yes, and cut you.
And cut you. Got to survive. Yeah.
But she didn't, because she wanted to. I mean, is she that much in love with Adam Ponape? We don't know. The love doesn't really show up until later. But it must have been, both were very, like I said in the beginning, it's all about sex. That's why this film works. She stayed because she wants him. He got her because he wanted her. And that one line, I don't know what it was in English, but in Japanese, she says, in her walking, all you wanted was a maid and a maid to clean and cook. And in Japanese, he says, well, that's part of the bargain too. But and then goes into this this love talk about sweet yellow hair and whatnot. And I'm thinking, okay, that's where the reality sits. This guy needed a woman who is strong enough and is sassy enough and has and have all these other abilities to be his wife, and he chose her. Now, I don't know if he was in love with her, but if he was in lust with her, bingo, it works that way. And she wanted out from that rural life, being treated like a frontier's woman back in the days. And then she under the bargain, she got worse. So she had to do something to better herself, instead of, not herself, but but the situation. Instead of running away and going back to the priest and saying that I told you, kind of a thing that she would probably get. She didn't want to go back to that either. So it kind of makes sense to me that she stayed that way.
Look at Bless Your Beautiful Hide. What happens during that song? He sees her being strong. And so he knows that she can actually handle him and everyone else. And then we have that wonderful number, Wonderful, Wonderful Day, where we see them actually courting, and we see them both telling you what they want. And she wanted one man to take care of. She wanted someone that she could love. And this is pioneer time. You need someone who can protect you. I mean, you think that she could be in a remake of The Revenant? No.
Well, that's the interesting thing too, and I think that's why this film, beyond being on its surface, to people that just don't know or haven't looked deeply into it enough, find it problematic, is the fact that it deals with universal themes. I mean, how many times throughout history have people wanted to get married for those reasons? How many times have you heard female friends or sisters, mothers complain about feeling just like a maid? I mean, these are musical circumstances. These are circumstances that are a little more extreme and hyperbolic, but the basic message is the same. She wants, love. He's in lust. He finds her terribly attractive and goes after her. But at the same time, she finds that she's going to have to not only be made to him, which he probably understood considering the time period and the way, you know, things worked back then, but not to the whole tribe. And that was like a little too much. That was more than she bargained for, but it's, you know, I think that's why it survived so well, because even though it is a musical with very complex and beautiful dance numbers and music beyond the book, I think that there's a lot of universal themes going on that people can relate to when they're watching this, men and women, especially men, you know, and the lust factor and how men love and the way men love and the way women love. But at the same time, you know, the way they just kind of don't want to be used as a maid and just somebody's servant. I mean, even though this was made in the 50s, about a time period way beyond then even, and much further from now, I think there's that universal theme of what is this going to entail, and, you know, how people need to be loved and what they're willing to take and what they're not willing to take and or put up with, that people relate to even today.
Now, what interesting aspect that I see in this particular film, now, as a musical, that is, works beautifully, and Michael Kidd is a genius with that dance number. Now, that dance number in itself is nothing but, you know, as they say in That's Entertainment, the dancing are for sissies. But if you look at Seven Brides, you'll think twice of it. It's the most butch.
Not if
Oh my gosh. Okay, aside that great number, if you notice, none of the songs in this film was a huge hit. None is a standard, not one. Now, Singing in the Rain has Singing in the Rain. Bandwagon has That's Entertainment. Mimi St. Louis has The Boy Next Door, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, and the Trolley Song. You know, and the list goes on with musicals that has a standard. This one does not have, but is a classic, and it was a bigger success than Brigadoon, with standard songs like, you know, most of the songs in Brigadoon is a hit. You know, you've got your Heather on the Hill, you've got your Come to Me, Benjamin, you've got your Bonnie Jean, you've got your what's the other one? Waiting for My Dearie, what have you. Anyway, the score was not distinguished per se, although it's one of my favorites. The reason is because of the plot, and I'm going to say it again, because of the sex in the movie. That's why it's a classic. It's the plot. For a change, a musical is famous for its plot. For a change, not because of its songs.
Well, and I
think about the other part of it too. As J. Preston Allen said, when movies during the production code era were moving toward their happy ending, you had what was called the DF, the delayed fuck. And if you think about Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, you've got a DF for 7 people at the end.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. Oh yeah.
A lot of blue in that film. A lot of blue. But it's interesting. And I think that even though it doesn't have a standard or a famous song to it, because there is that tension, I guess, the DF, that tension that's stretched out throughout. And really, when you think about it, a lot of the best His Girl Friday and films of that nature, where there's just that basic male-female relationship, that tension is what drives it. It makes you want to keep watching, keeps pulling you in, because you're wondering when's going to happen. And especially since it's intimated that one of them, the oldest one who has the baby at the end, that there is sex going on, and it just kind of gives you a little taste of what's possible. And then, you know, kind of, because it brings you back to there being sex in it, because like, oh yeah, they're not just, you know, fighting and doing all this. That tension there's something behind it. There's another layer to it. So yeah, I agree. I think that the sexual tension of the delayed fuck, it really does make it much more interesting.
And what are the possibilities that these girls are actually pregnant at the time when they get married? What are the odds? I'd say about
Oh yeah. There's definitely that. Then you wonder about that. You know, you're like, are they? There's got to be something. There's 7 of them. There's 14 people in this house.
My baby. That's why they say that.
Yeah.
It's like the very ending when it's a shotgun wedding. It's funny, right? But the other aspect is, okay, are they going to be all nice with the parents and the brothers after they've abducted them?
Hence the musical aspect of it. Everybody loves one another.
But then again, I mean, they're all nice at the end. If you notice, they all come together after I do, and then now we pronounce the men and wives, and they all come together. The brothers, the bride, and the fathers all come together. It's like everything's forgiven.
Well, as the NRA would say, guns make everybody happy. So
once you say I do, that's it. And quote, I Love Lucy one more time. It's since we said I do, there's so many things we don't.
That's funny. Oh my God!
You're seeing the sexual blossoming of the characters during the oh, the barnyard is busy in a regular Tizzy song. What's the song?
Yeah.
Spring. Yeah.
Wow. There you go.
Sitting there holding a lamb. If you're a woman and you're sitting there holding a lamb with the studly guy next to you, you're holding the lamb as a prop. Oh, you're telling him, I can actually carry a baby around. So she's giving him a hint.
Yeah. And the funny thing, they're talking about spring and blossoming and things like that. The more we talk about it, the more it feels like this movie is about sexual coming of age for these kids, because they're basically all young people who are just kind of and then the representation of throwing things at one another, fighting with one another, and the tension that builds. And what happens when men and women usually fight in movies? They end up making out in the next scene, or it's a representation of, I don't want to say penetration, but some kind of contact that is a physical act of violence that will translate into something else later on.
Well, in a very Pauline Kael way, I have to say, the song "Spring, Spring, Spring" is a metaphor to all the sexual things that they can do. Right
there, you go. What happens in spring? Everybody thaws.
Also, if it wasn't for that one scene, the brides wouldn't have worked. The cat fight scene, if that wasn't there, it wouldn't have worked as well, because it shows, and that as Dan would say, women fighting is always fabulous. You look at it in the women, you look at it in
Dynasty.
Destry Rides Again.
Destry Rides Again.
And what's the one that I'm thinking of that I just thought and it just went away?
Who's in it?
Harvey Girls. There you go.
Harvey Girls.
Let Me At Her.
Yeah, Let Me At Her. Yeah, that. Those are all like hair being torn out. I mean, women fighting physically is always, I don't know why, but it's entertaining, I guess. I don't know. Men fighting is like, because it's normal. Women fighting it's not just this, but it's more intricate how they fight.
Going to school in very different parts of LA, I will say, I saw more women throw down, and trust me, their fights were much more intense, brutal, and skilled than any of the guys I saw throw down when they were doing the windmills.
Oh yeah.
The women, I would never. They were hardcore. So, I'm saying that they had more guts than, and just, I don't know. That's probably a sexist thing to say. I shouldn't say that, but just from what I visually saw, like, these women were skilled. And,
they use more brains than brawn when they fight.
I would say, but even with man, it was intense. I'm like, wow, I'm gonna watch my P's and Q's from now on.
Okay, if I pulled
all respect to the women fighters out there.
Yeah, because the way they think. If I pull this side of the hair to this side, she's gonna fall onto this rock. Oh, perfect. Let's do this. As opposed to men, no. They think, and that's what all these fights seems like. In the women, it's like that. Oh, let's bite her in the shin. Stuff like.
Yeah, bite her in the shin. Well, it's Spartacus. They could hamstring somebody. Spartacus reminds me of that. I came from nowhere. So. Dan, you still there?
Yes,
you still there, Dan? You're just watching us dig our hole.
You had mentioned something about the two different versions of it. And having not really seen the square screen version multiple times, I've only seen the widescreen version a lot of times. But you two clearly know the other one. Which version do you think is better, and why?
CinemaScope, because it's more fun. It's it's wide and it's more garish, I would say, in CinemaScope, and it calls for it, despite the fact that a couple of scenes are like, okay, it's a painting backdrop. Oh, look, there's a bird that fell off. I mean, just ran into the wall, you know, stuff like that. That infamous story about birds going on the floor. Especially in the Wonderful, Wonderful Day scene, that's a set. Like, you know, that's when people start to laugh in the theater. But also, as we discussed before, that's the charm of this movie, because it's a fantasy in a way.
Yeah.
So fantasy equals, in a sense. Now, in the meantime, it was shot side by side like this. So there's scenes that you can see from this side and this side, CinemaScope side and the square screen side. Now, in a very strange way, if you put them together, it's a secret 3D.
Oh yeah, that'd be interesting. You'd go blind, but it'd be worth seeing.
Exactly.
Well, everything.
But
For
the
me,
first thing that you notice that is not that was either shot separately, or I think they just used this particular side, was because in some other take was when Millie gets to the house and she goes into the and she goes into the cabin. That's the first time that you actually notice it's a different take. There's a whole bunch of reels like that. That was a different take. Also, the way they speak the lines are different. So
different,
that's
yeah, different. Yeah.
Yeah, if you know the film well enough,
You can point them out. Yeah. Well, the funny thing is with me, I love the anamorphic. You're right. I know. When it comes to which version I like better, the anamorphic or the flat version, I'd have to say the anamorphic for the same reason. I mean, because it's true that something that needs that kind of whimsy, when you add the distortion that anamorphic, especially original CinemaScope adds, because original CinemaScope is 255. They eventually cut it down to 235, so they wouldn't have the warping they would have and the problems that anamorphics bring on. I like 255. I like films like, you know, like Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, and musicals that use widescreen, that original CinemaScope. Bad Day at Black Rock is really a subtle film, but with some interesting warping when the camera just does that. But I think with a musical especially, and when you get into like I think it was Nicholas Ray who did use the anamorphic indoor, it creates a different effect. But it does give that fantasy element. It adds to the fantasy element of the film and films like that, and I think it helps it work. And especially when you're working with dance scenes, especially the ones in this film, like I think it was a wood chopping scene. Was there a wood chop? The barn raising. That one of those was done in one take. I mean, if you can pull that off with no cuts, with an animal, you know, shooting it in 255, that's really going to add to the spectacle. And I think that's what it does. It gives it that dreamlike fantasy element that it makes everything. It makes the leaps a little more profound. It changes the way you move within this, especially at the edges of the lens. It really makes different strange things happen that makes it almost feel like a dream. So I like that. The 185 I like because of the implication of the fact that we're not sure if it's really going to work completely in CinemaScope, even though we've been using this lens or this type of technology for about a year. And we're just going to have this, you know, it's expensive. It's one of those things. It's going to be expensive and it's going to be difficult. Each anamorphic and shooting spherical, they both have their different problems. And when you're shooting something at the same time and you're lit for anamorphic and you're lit for you have to light for both, you have to compose for both. And because you want to get the best out of both technologies, both types of lenses, you know, there's a lot that has to go in that. There's a lot of rehearsal and there's a lot of checks and rechecks. And the fact, and just in a broader sense of the historical meaning of it, in terms of how TV was eating in to the film budgets. I mean, the profitability of theatrically shown films is astonishing because they had been using anamorphic lenses since The Robe, and this was shot a year before The Robe. So I mean, there's a year between The Robe and this film, Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, basically. And in that time, CinemaScope, we see it as this grand cinematic tool that revolutionized filmmaking, when what it really was a way to get people back into seats. It was a way to get people back into, butts into seats, and to give people something they couldn't see on their little TVs, because big TVs were like 13-inch screens or 19-inch screens if you were very wealthy. And it just wasn't the same experience. But even after a year, it shows how influential TV was. Even after a year of innovation, studios still weren't sure. MGM still wasn't sure that that CinemaScope was going to be enough. So they had to shoot it flat as well. So, and actually that means it's basically, because it was matted to 1.85. So they shot it 4:3. They shot it 1:37 Academy aperture, Academy ratio. So it can actually be presented if shown unmatted in 3 different aspect ratios. And I find that fascinating. I love that. But in terms of the film itself and seeing it, I say the anamorphic is the best way.
But my question is, when they showed it on
actually
TV, why didn't they ever use the square screen version? Why did they always use a pan and scan version?
The story has it that, and it's a lie, because on TV it's always been the 185. I was like, no,
that's not true.
That's just a film selling ploy. This person who sold me the print of Seven Brides. This is the 185 version, but guess what? This 185 16mm IB Tech print is 185. It's got mask on top and the bottom.
Maybe they're just lazy, and don't want to, scan an unmatted version. I don't know. I don't know if that's it. I have no idea.
That's just how they that's just how they printed this particular one. So what I plan to do is I plan to try to transfer it onto video. I mean, although it's kind of redundant, but I like doing that because the color is natural IB Tech Technicolor, and I wanted. It's just fun to preserve it. Anyway,
real quick, do you guys have the Laserdisc? I think I asked Hisato this the other day. Do you guys have the Laserdisc in the late 90s that has both versions? It's a rare release, but yeah, because it's the 185 and the 235, right? They don't have the full screen on that.
No, I don't know if they want to make. I mean, I don't know. I mean, was it shot masks? I don't know.
No, I think what probably happened with your 16mm print, I think that was probably a hard mat that they used for school showings and things for schools and other places that didn't have an anamorphic lens.
Right, for the projector to project out anamorphically. Yeah. Interesting.
It's a nice print, but still, it's kind of weird because I expected. Much like Rosemary. Now let's go into that. The first CinemaScope picture that MGM made. Now this is, I think, it's Technicolor, and it's like print by ASCO. I don't know which one it was, but it's it's kind of like it's the color is definitely Technicolor. However, my thing about this is that that was shot twice as well, because now the square screen version, as I would call it, is rare. But guess what? When I actually bought the 16 of it, it was that version. So, spicy as it may be, it's fun to have both versions. I haven't,
absolutely.
I haven't filmed enough to see if there's any difference. But still, I like the film. It didn't do too well. I mean, Operetta in 1953, 54, I don't know. But whatever the case may be, what's odd is that Seven Brides has always been blurred on home video from the get-go. Even on TV, they were blurry until.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes.
It was shot. What was it shot in 3-strip Technicolor, or was it shot in Ansco color and then printed in Technicolor?
That's what I think happened.
I think it was shot in Technicolor and printed in ASCO, and it was
that explains it, because what happened was, just like with How to Marry a Millionaire, when the reason that the monopack color became popular as opposed to the 3-strip is because, as it was, you never had perfect registration. Right. And so when you put that in CinemaScope and you widen the image to 3 times, something that was a minor misregistration in 137, all of a sudden you're going to see a ghost. And it's going to be so grainy because it's 3 separate layers of film, each one with grain. So that was the reason why single pack Technicolor became popular, or single pack deluxe color became so popular, because the image was so sharp compared to Technicolor.
No,
They just didn't know
what I meant was no. I think Seven Brides was shot in ANSCO, but but Rosemary was in Technicolor, I think. But Rosemary's sharper always than.
And that's a problem with Technicolor too throughout the decade, because it started to become a rubber stamp. Everything started just said because Technicolor was such a dominant force and label of quality early on, at least when it came to like new innovations in color and stuff like that. People got excited when they saw Technicolor. And after a while throughout the decade, everybody just rubber stamped Technicolor on it because the prints were by Technicolor, but the original color may not have been. It was Eastman Technicolor prints.
When it says prints by Technicolor, that actually meant they went with 3 separate matrices. So technically, if it was prints by Technicolor, they shouldn't fade that badly. But we all know that Technicolor had lab problems throughout the 50s.
Yeah.
So
now, Seven Brides, the color was really good. Now let's take another film from 1954 with questionable color called Athena. That was made on the tail of Seven Brides, the success of the Seven Brides. Now this time it's about 7 sisters. At least 4 of the sisters are the same. 3 of the 4 of the sisters are the same, but the others are different, because the sisters weren't as prominent as they were in Seven Brides. Well, whatever the case may be, the color is murky. The color is totally ANSCO. It's not vibrant. It's not garish. Much like some of the other 54 CinemaScope pictures made at the time, color is murky, because it's the early stages of the as you said, the monopack. So it's kind of sad. You can probably fix it, but when they reissued it, it's a reissue. When they reissued on DVD on Warner Archives, claiming it's a new restoration, it's red. It's redder. I wonder why, because all the subsequent ones were kind of not red, but the color was not. But it was I just want to call it the monopack color, basically, not as red as the newest version of Athena. That is Seven Brides. On the other hand, you know what? You were right about this. If you look at the new Blu-ray and the credits, it looks colorized. The trees are too green. Yeah. It's been color looks added on. I'm like, oh, I bet they did. That's what I thought.
And here's a thing you were saying about sometimes companies would do this. I'm not sure if it answers the question about why the TV versions were blurry. I don't know how well used the 185 was, but could they have, because this happens sometimes too, could they have could they pan and scan the anamorphic version? Is that why it was blurry on TV? Because they use that one instead? Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Horrible decision on their part. Horrible.
I have not seen on a TV broadcast, even in Japan, it was the pan and scan version. Wow. I've never seen, as this guy claims, the square screen version on TV. I mean, of course, in some forgotten Needlesville, Indiana, they could have shown it. I don't know.
But it's actually very popular in Needlesville, from what I hear. That's how half the town was born.
Okay.
Sorry. I hope there's no Needlesville watching this.
How
dare him?
Right. I know. Is there such a place? I don't know. Anyway, no. So my train of thought, Needlesville.
Sorry.
No. So my
experience watching it.
Is that it doesn't matter. There could be several 16ths of it that they could send out, and mine could have been one of them, because how else does it exist? So they could have been a TV print. I don't know.
Is it possible as a pirate print?
No. It's an original, great color. It's IB Tech, great print. So, I just have to pull it out. It's downstairs somewhere.
5-finger discount. Somebody just kind of went, whoop, got lost. Don't know what happened. Whoopsie.
Well, speaking of which, I just wanted to touch up on this. because we were talking about Technicolor and Centennial Summer. Centennial Summer, unfortunately, if it's IB Tech, it smells like vomit sometimes.
Oh God.
That's just how the film smells. Anyway, that
Has nothing to do with the content of the film.
No, it does not. It does not. It also, unfortunately, caught vinegar syndrome.
Wow. So vinegar and vomit. That's a terrible combination.
Oh, it's lovely. But what's good is that reel 2 and 3, I used this thing called Vitafilm, soaked it in, waited 3 months, and guess what? It's not bad. It runs, yeah. It's reel 1 that's the problem still. So I re-soaked it, and hopefully it'll, some I guess it depends on what the film is. There's a stack of film back there now that's been treated with Vitafilm. Hopefully, most of them will look fun. But I had to throw away some. One of them, unfortunately, being 100 Men and a Girl.
No. Oh man, I know that poster you have in one of the bathrooms. You have a few posters from that, don't you? Yeah, it's because they're beautiful.
Oh yes.
Yeah. Oh, the poster work. Just like the one behind you. Like, there's a lost art to poster art these days. Now it's all headshots. Headshots of people in costume. It's like, you look at the poster for the train. That was an amazing piece of art. But to kind of go back to what we were talking about before, which I think is very relevant these days, is this film is a great film, but in terms of it being problematic, what are your, Hisato, I'll ask you, if Dan doesn't mind, what do you think about it? What do you think about the problematic elements in today's society? Is it part of the groundworks, of Hollywood? Is it really an offensive film? Do you think it's an offensive film? If so, how or how not?
Okay, offensive perhaps to women to a point, but then again, they tend to redeem themselves. Look at the very ending. They use their brain. How are we going to stay? That's right. Let's make the baby mine. So it's got that redeeming quality. Women are smart, and they can also fight. They can be feisty. So I think it works in that sense. I think this film will be liked better than a whole bunch of other musicals from the time, because it depicts men can be stupid, but they have hearts, loving hearts. Now, it's a man's world anyway, so let's just get the women, but they learn things that you can't treat them, like a bunch of flapjacks, as Millie says during going courting.
That's right. No, it's true. Dan.
And because this film is not musical number centered, in that like I said before, none of the songs were hits, not one, and not one became a standard. So it really have to revolve around the plot
and the dancing. And the dancing was amazing. You see, when anybody who's done any kind of music, anybody who's done any kind of musical work like that, it's kind of like there's certain parts of a film that elevate it. I do not like the film because I just don't like the characters from Saturday Night Fever, but the music is what is that film's saving grace, and that music is still big today. And I think that has to do a lot with the film's popularity anyway. But when it comes to something like this, I think it's the dancing. The songs were good. They were very good, but the dancing was just so intense. You have Russ Tamblyn, you have people, four of the men, I think, were actual professional dancers. 2 of the actors that play the brothers were not, but Russ Tamblyn was amazing. And he was not a dancer. He was taught. No. And one of the other brothers wasn't either.
That was Jeff Richards. Jeff Richards, if you watch closely at the ballet, he just pops at the end.
And that's it. He's like, hey.
And, it was Dorcas. That's about it. Now, mind you, Tommy Rawl, who played Frankincense, was one of the best dancers Hollywood ever had. And on Broadway, he was in a show called Milk and Honey, and he could sing as well. And he's that handsome? Are you joking? Why are you so talented? He was one of the, not the Meghalin Kitties, but he was one of the Jiving Jackson Jills from Universal days. He was, if you can believe this, he actually made films as a teenager in some of those Universal programmers, in a film called What's Cookin', starring Donald O'Connor, Gloria Jean, Elise Knox, Robert Page, all those, Peggy Ryan, all those people. And they even get credits. And Javin Jackson Jills. In it was a 15-year-old Tommy Rawl, and he does incredible feats as a 15-year-old in that film as well.
Wow.
He's featured in one tiny section, and it's obviously him. And you go, wow, now that's amazing. And then there's Jack D'Amboise, who can't act, so they gave him like 2 lines in the movie. Everybody, Millie's having a baby. That's one of them. Maybe he's dubbed. Yeah, of course.
Classic. Of course.
He could have been dubbed, his lines, because apparently, according to the musical film dance historian Larry Billman, he says that he talked to him on the phone, and he says his name like this: "Hi, this is Jack D'Amboise."
Of course, that's his birth name.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yeah, I mean, it is his birth name. It's his real name. Yeah. Like Charlotte D'Amboise's daughter.
Oh, it is
also a dancer. Yeah. But it's a French name, but he can't speak French. I don't know. And then there's Matt Talks from his ballet company, and all these people that were great dancers because they had to have dancers.
Yeah. Most of them, at least. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Well, Russ Tamblyn, I think this is his first film in which he got to do the acrobatic stuff. I think
because he ended up doing a lot of that in a few other films, right? As well, from what I remember. Tom Thumb, exactly. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah, and he was good for that. And
the funny thing is that I remember watching him in Samson and Delilah at the very end.
Yep. He was throughout. Yeah, he plays young Saul.
Exactly.
He's a kid version of Saul, and that's the thing that irks me. Okay,
12,
as a
13?
Yeah, he's probably 11, 12. He's probably about 12ish. Dan would probably know, I forget, but he was a kid. And the thing that always bothered me about Paramount is they never got it, because even to this day, Angela Lansbury and Russ Tamblyn are still around, knock on wood.
Yeah.
And they never got an audio commentary from them. And those are the 2 surviving members of the cast. And it always bothered me that they treat Samson and Delilah like the redheaded stepchild of their sword and sandal epics. But anyway, that's a story for another day. But sorry, Dan. Did I mess things up?
No.
I'm like, did Dan go get some food, man? No,
I'm just talk.
I love hearing Hisato talk, but I was curious because I remember you were talking about that. I'm curious as to what you have to say if Hisato was done. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No.
About societal implication about the film. I'm curious because you brought that up, and it's interesting. What do you think about the film's place in society now, considering the viewpoint of today?
Mm-hmm. I think it's very much a film that's well worth preserving. I think it's well worth for students to take a look at it, because you have to see how the world has changed. Because part of the liberation of the woman characters in this is, in fact, partially based on the success of I Love Lucy on TV. Because you had someone who was able to stand up to her husband, unlike virtually every other TV show. And here in 7 Brides for 7 Brothers, none of these brides are doormats. Every single one has her sense of agency. She gets angry. She has her pluck, but she stands by her man when push comes to shove because she really likes him. Why does she like the men? She likes the men, the woman liked the men because as much as Millie did, each individual woman molded the guy she ends up with to be her guy. So it's really about the 7 brides molding the 7 brothers. If you're going to go in traditional 3-part dramatic structure, the people who have the character change are the brothers. They learn they cannot treat women as possessions. Every one of them learns this, and including Howard Keel. So it's actually a proto-feminist message. But again, one of the challenges that we have when we watch movies today is that people watch it with the implicit bias that they're going to watch something that's sexist. And then when you say, I'm going to be offended, you will be offended.
Right. If you look for it, you'll find it.
That's and this movie, if you actually break it down and you think who the main characters are, who changes, what are the signs of that change? Every single time it's a woman having a positive impact on a guy. Yes, the guys do what's considered a mortal sin. They kidnap these women. But let's look at it another way. Why do the fathers, even though they kind of jokingly say, you know, I got my gun at the end, why do the fathers let it happen? Because realistically speaking, how did those fathers get their brides?
Yeah.
And how did those fathers' wives find the fathers? They probably had to do something that was similar. The fact that Jane Powell even understands that there's a ritual of courting shows that there was a refinement coming into this territory, and that the guys are willing to be civilized. So I get angry because I actually think this is a film that has a positive feminist message, unlike A Star Is Born.
Yeah.
I have problems with A Star Is Born for the exact opposite reasons, because in it, Judy Garland enables Norman Maine to fall apart. She's too good. She's too forgiving. These women make the guys suffer for kidnapping them. Norman Maine is enabled by Judy. And that's a reason why, I'll be honest, I don't like the Judy Garland Star. I don't like any version of A Star Is Born. But why in particular, after 3 hours of watching the Judy Garland one, I'm like, I love the numbers in this. I will never watch this whole thing again.
Ever. Right.
I'm serious. I haven't watched the whole thing since, I want to say, the 80s, when I saw it projected.
Theater.
I think so. I think that's the last time I watched the whole thing end to end.
Yeah,
interesting. I have to think about that. Yeah, I've seen it all the way through once, if even that much. I mean, I've always watched it in chunks. That's interesting. I don't think I've ever watched it all the way through.
Fantastic, but you put it all together.
Oh, it's Judy.
It's excruciating.
Yeah.
And
well, yeah, because whenever I watch the scenes with James Mason, I have to look. I do kind of have to step out of the room, come to think of it, because he's a mess and he's obnoxious. Yeah, I can't watch it because of him, not as much because of her. But yeah, you're right. She does enable him throughout the film.
He gives a
what's interesting to me is that the villain of the film, Libby, is actually he's the best character in the film. If you think about it, the villain, Libby, is the best character in the film, because he's not a pushover. He is doing what he's doing, and guess what? He did his job. And I'm sorry, but Norman Maine was a shit to him for all those years.
Norman treated him like a servant,
like a piece of shit.
Yes. He treats him shittily.
Yeah. So Libby, you feel more for Libby, not And what's the line that he says when he's watching the Happiness Ahead banner, replacing the Legion one, stuff like that. Oh, speaking of which, I have to mention, Seven Bride was cast real well, especially with the brides. Despite the fact that Julie Newmar was a dancer, she actually once complained about the fact that she couldn't do much of the dancing part because of Jeff Richards, because he wasn't a dancer. Now, in the meantime, but if you think about it, she's the one who is the sexiest one, for starters, with cinched waist and everything.
Agreed.
She's who brings in the sex in that scene. Which one of the boys do you think were in this bed disposed? Like, Dorcas Kelly. I mean, that scene is like, thank you for saying, speaking about the elephant in the room. Thank you, Dorcas. We call it Dorky Dorcas. We love Dorky Dorcas. And then, if you think about it, the first time she does gives in the sexual desire is with a leer, with a snowball. She wipes her hands like this, and she's leering out to the boys. I'm like, yes, Dorky Dorcas, we love you for being lusty.
That's why I watch the film. That's why I watch it. To see early Catwoman.
I really, really enjoy watching Seven Brides for Seven Brothers because it makes you feel good at the end. And
It does.
and it makes you feel good because you see the change in the characters. You've had a bunch of good songs. You've had a bunch of dances that aren't too long. That's another thing. When I think of something like An American in Paris or some of the movies Gene Kelly was making, and even Fred Astaire, you get to the dance numbers and they become heavy and endless.
Yeah.
So
with one person. I wonder if it had to do with how many people were actually in each Seven Brothers. You know, I mean, with that many people in that confined space, I wonder how difficult it was to make extended dances or dance routines with that many people, especially with two of them that weren't professional dancers. I wonder if that kind of had anything to do with the length of the dance sequences by Donen or
but then
the
again,
choreographer. Sorry.
The other non-dancer was Russ Tamblyn. You knew that, right?
Yeah.
All the rest of the dancers.
No, one of them, the two of them. It was Rusty and another one weren't. There were two that weren't dancers.
Yeah, it's Russ Tamblyn and Jeff Richards.
Yes, thank you.
One. Yeah,
that's
the
right.
one that MGM was trying to make into a star. They starred him in films and stuff, but guess what? It didn't work out. He was doing things to the contracty ladies that's unmentionables. You know, of course. You know,
mention them. You mention them right now. You know. Don't you dare hide this. This is a Wild West, man. This is a podcast. You can say it all. There are no repercussions, man.
I got to tell you, one of the problems that I think he had is that when you look at him, as you know, in an actor, you have to be able to do one of three things: walk, talk, or act. And the problem with him is he's one of those guys who's really good looking when he's standing still, but the moment he walks, the illusion gets shattered because he doesn't walk properly. He has this awkward way of walking. And
I can see that.
And to say nothing of when he speaks, his voice doesn't fit his face anymore.
I've seen that. Yeah, I get that.
And so therefore he doesn't walk, he doesn't talk, and he doesn't act. He's a triple negative threat.
Yeah.
So the fact that he looks good in magazine pictures isn't enough.
Right.
Well,
how interesting.
They were trying to make him to a star, but in his case, he was too gay, apparently. But then again, walking wise, Carlin Carpenter was the same thing. He was too lanky and too awkward when he walked. That's what I'm looking at, you know. And
interesting.
I happen to have this thing. It's a physiques magazine. But the reason why I have this is because it's got an article. Where are you? It's in here someplace. Just 1 second. Thank you very much. I hate you when this doesn't.
It's funny when you don't need it. When you don't need it, it's everywhere. Yeah. And the moment you want to find it, it's gonna hide.
Well, it's just like Bobby Rydell. Bobby Rydell was a physique model.
Hiding right now. Darn it! Where are you? I hate you. I really do.
Is that just one of the many magazines, fitness magazines you have around, Hisato? Be honest.
Jeff Richards was, good in these kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait. Let me remove so that you'll see. There you go. See, that's Jeff Richards.
Yep.
Seven Brides He-Man scores in many rivers roll. What the hell does that mean? I don't know. But they were, at least they were trying to make him into a. And he did make films like Dog's Life, playing an asshole, and he made films like The Opposite Sex. I mean, they were really trying to make him into a star.
Wow.
But the sad thing is that from what the urban legend, I would say, is that he became a janitor at MGM. Look, I'm in show business. I work at MGM. I'm a janitor. That's what I heard. Of course, I don't know if it's true or not, but if it is, you've got to make a living somehow. So I don't.
I mean, there's no shame in it, but it's a certain fall from grace. Yeah. No, I understand.
It is. I don't say it's sad. I just say it's like that's just how.
Well, no, yeah. No, I mean, hey, he was working.
That's the other thing. In all of our lives, at some point, we become email Yannings in the Blue Angel, and the important thing is to not die in our schoolrooms, but to keep going, right? And he kept going at least.
He did. Which is good. So
Eric von Stroheim in Sunset Boulevard, where he's gone from being one of the top directors to being a butler, just to hang around the woman he used to love, and she's sleeping with some gigolo.
Yeah.
Can you imagine how much degradation you must be going through to be able to put up with that?
Oh, yes.
I mean, in Sunset Boulevard, it would have made more sense if Eric von Stroheim shot William Holden.
True.
True, you're right.
It's interesting to go back to God, that film. Talking about the casting of it, talking about the actors that were in it, the casting, and just I think going back a little further into Donen, the director, and how he's, I don't know, because we're talking about the film, his films are always well cast, and this film is no exception.
Yeah.
But when you go back to On the Town and films like Anchors Away, he was also credited for something. He was also credited for bringing musicals out of the Busby Berkeley soundstage and out into making the music actually part of the story, which is, I think, what he was good at. And,
integrated musicals.
Yeah, he's integrating the musicals to where the action in the musical, it wasn't just a bunch of girls just come out in the middle of the stage and start doing choreographed numbers.
Well, that was also Vincente Minnelli and Oklahoma, where that had already been a trend in the making. But I think you're absolutely right that Donen refined it and made it more. And
because what year was Oklahoma?
Oklahoma, the Broadway show is 43.
But and the movie was?
The movie 55.
55, yeah. And when was Anchors Away?
46.
46, yeah. 45, 46, yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is in the movies.
Mimi St. Louis was 44, and that's kind of looked at as the start of that.
I can see that, yeah.
Although other people will take it back to Wizard of Oz, other people will take it back to Showboat. So it's
that I can see. Yeah,
it's a moving target.
Yeah,
it is. So back to Seven Brides with the integrated. You with the reason why the ballet is gorgeous and it works is because the brides. Okay, first of all, the townsfolk and the Ponyville brothers are fighting, but they fight with dance, and the women are saying, "Oh, we are the desired prize. Who do we pick?" So they pick the rugged He-Man. That's like sexually attractive to them, and that shows at the very end of the number when they go down and on into the arms, and with all that thing, you're rooting for the Parnaby brothers and the brides. Oh, okay, so it's very integrated into the story in that fashion. Now, Kelly ballets don't do that. Like American in Paris Ballet basically is a retelling of the entire movie. On the other hand, Fred Astaire, he had a number called "Will You Marry Me" in Yolanda and the Thief, which went on it's like a 10-minute number basically, but it's just weird and fun to look at, gorgeous to look at, but just had no meaning to it. The film bombed, unfortunately. I like it, but it's a dumb story. But the other one from the bandwagon
following.
What?
It has a huge cult following.
Oh, I know it does, because first of all, it's Vincent Minnelli. It's one of his weirdest movies, and it's the story's dumb, but it's gorgeously shot in Technicolor. So I like it personally. I really do. But if you want to talk about long musical numbers, the Girl Hunt Ballet, at least it's a story. It's a murder mystery. It's a spoof, and it's got talking in it, so it works. It's not boring. At least with that, it doesn't have the Gene Kelly-itis. Can you imagine a film with just nothing but American Paris Ballet, like Invitation to the Dance, for instance?
Invitation to the Dance is unwatchable.
It's totally unwatchable. As a short, sure.
As a short, bad, but Invitation to the Dance to me is as hard to watch as Fantasia. where it's interesting in each of its pieces, but then when you watch it all from top to bottom, it's hard.
I like watching the pastoral sequence because I have the uncut version, so it's always interesting to see for different reasons.
I know, we love it.
Do you have any last words on Seven Brides for Seven Brothers?
I do. My last word would be watch it, And the reason, I don't know how the kids would react these days, but I remember watching the film with you, Ashi-san, at USC, when people are talking, oh God, it's an old musical. It's an old movie. Not just an old movie, it's a musical, man. God, do we have to watch this? And then, people will start laughing at inappropriate moments, or they go, oh my God, look at that. It still looks so fake, like during Wonderful, Wonderful Day. All that stuff is happening, but the movie goes on, and at the end, people were applauding it. Kids were loving it. The students, I'm like, score.
Absolutely,
So,
absolutely.
Yeah,
because the technical on it, yes, is outdated, but the emotions are there, and it makes you feel good. And it's just like when you're with people, you want to work with people that you feel good with. And Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, you end up feeling good at the end of the movie.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
You do.
I agree. I think. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I said it's not like Sunset Boulevard when you leave the theater feeling like a piece of.
Well, Sunset Boulevard was kind of, it didn't do well financially.
Oh, I didn't know that. I thought it did.
It was a dark film for that time. When you look at it, when you step back and like actually look at it for what it is, and what Dan mentioned earlier, he is a gigolo, and he knows it, and he's taking advantage of this woman who's mentally unstable, and it's a weird situation. It's got a lot of dark, and calling the people that the old film actors the waxworks. And just the allusions to death everywhere. It's a hard film for people in the 50s to watch.
Well, what's harder is the fact that it's supposed to be, about old movie star who's near death or something. But if you think about it, she's only like maybe hitting 50.
That's because she personally looked good.
Fine. Norma,
you're only 50.
There's nothing wrong with being 50 unless you're trying to be 25.
Yeah, that's right.
I understand that, but the thing is that they made the film, as if you watch it as a youngster, it's about people who's old and is nearing death. It's about people.
Well, I guess to a kid, 50 is old.
I know.
Yeah.
And now that I'm over 50,
when my students find out how old I am, they're always surprised, because I'm sitting here talking to them about YouTube and stuff like that, and they're used to having my fellow teachers who are younger than me not being able to keep up with this stuff.
That's their problem.
It's a matter of trying to keep up. I can't, and I know it. But I don't try to dismiss it either, and I think that's the difference.
Oh, Dan, you could keep up with it. Don't you lie here on this podcast. You're a very knowledgeable man. You could pick up anything. Now, Dan, the funny thing about Dan, and I've said this before, when when you speak to him personally, it's one thing. When you see him in front of a class, there's a certain amount of dynamic energy, and it's like I was surprised. Not that I didn't know Dan had the knowledge and everything, but man, when you get him on a roll and he's talking about film, there's no stopping the man. So that's why they're surprised, because I'm sure like the rest of us, they think you could do it all.
No, what happens is that they'll ask me a question and I'll have an answer and I won't look it up.
Yeah. And people don't have to memorize anything anymore, or phone numbers.
And I go, because when I was your age, instead of paying attention in math class by playing on my cell phone, my friend Rob and I were giving each other Academy Award quizzes. So that's why I know this stuff. I had that timeline base, so it becomes easy to put everything in place.
So why do when people ask, why do you how do you know this stuff? Because I want to be good when it comes to this category on Jeopardy. Okay, that's it.
Absolutely.
That's it. I mean, whenever there's a film category, I go, boom. This is mine. But it's interesting. But I know what you mean though, because I grew up with movies because of my mom, and she just had them on all the time. She never forced them on me. So when people start talking about certain things, and once you start learning about movies, it's not just the movie. It takes at least a couple hundred people to make a movie happen, and everybody puts their input in. And when you start tracking this stuff like a web, everything connects, and then all these interesting factoids connect one thing to another, and it's easy to tangent, as I do. You guys understand that. So you know me. So, but it's funny when people out there are like, how do you know this stuff? And it's like, it's not like you set out to be knowledgeable. You set out to just know it all, but everything's connected, and you can't learn one thing without learning 26 other things. Yeah.
Well, that's the same when they asked me, why don't you use a textbook? And I said, because textbooks are wrong.
Yeah.
And I'll
exactly.
say, until recently,
Textbook is one person's opinion.
They would still say this. The Paramount decision was the studios were forced to sell the theaters, and it wasn't. The theaters are the studios.
Yeah.
And people don't know that. Or why is it the dramas were shot in black and white? They were shot in black and white because the three strip Technicolor cameras were so heavy that you couldn't do camera movements.
Yeah, and loud. Yeah, and they were loud and they were a pain.
They were loud and they were a pain because they had so much buffering on them. And in a musical, if you look at most musicals, the musical numbers have a lot of camera movement because you didn't have to worry about the sound because you have playback.
That's right. That's right.
Look at the drama scenes. Look at something like Anchors Aweigh. You got a pretty locked down camera for most of the shots.
Yeah.
And then you have a musical number.
Anything, that's all there's to it.
Yeah, no, it's true. There's it's a lot of it goes back to this. I mean, and somebody said this to me once a long time ago. It always makes sense whenever there's a question about why something happens in Hollywood, it's money. Because the thing is, Technicolor cameras, which you were saying, loud, cumbersome, they had ways around that, but they were expensive because they would take time, and they would take more crew, and it would just be a lot of money. And the processing of it's more expensive too. So unless you had a big blockbuster film, you were pretty sure it was going to make a good amount of money. You were going to shoot it in black and white because it was easy, it was quiet, it would cost you less in the long run. It's always money. Because I mean, the technology, because before 3-strip, they had 2-strip Technicolor. There are ways to do things, and they were getting better at it, but that was also very expensive because it was more of a guess. Brown didn't come out brown, blue didn't come out blue. You had to mix certain combinations of fabrics with a 2-strip Technicolor. So, I mean, and that's cumbersome. And if you watch The Black Pirate, it's the pinnacle of 2-strip Technicolor, and it's really great. But they spent so much doing the test footage. I mean, to where the point where, if I think it was Fairbanks who had a very thick scruff, like we all kind of have a thick scruff. And in 2-strip Technicolor, it would come up green, I think. So they had to put magenta makeup on him for it to neutralize. So, I mean, that's the kind of thought process you had with certain color. And with color films, it was different. And that's an interesting point when it comes to colorizing black and white films and why they look ridiculous. But I think that's a conversation for another time.
We'll look at that on another session. But Ty, do you have any last words about Seven Brides?
It was interesting. It's interesting when you think about it. I love the film, the fact that, of course, it was shot 2 different ways, but because it was such a, again, I think it's a fun musical. It's a fun movie. And I think the sexual tension, as we were talking about earlier, makes it just all that much more gripping, and it hooks you because you can feel it. It's something everybody can relate to. And I think it'll stand the test of time. And when it comes to the topic of it being problematic, like you said, if you look for it, it's going to be there. But if you examine it a little more closely, you see that because, and again, this is a running theme with me, it's about the context of the time in which it was made. Even though the women were gung-ho and, they were representing a time period that were thought and were being a time period that was being seen through the lens of people that lived in the 50s and were alive then. And everything was very different after World War II. And after the wars, the way people saw the past was a little different. The good old days, so it was being seen from a specific lens. But I think it's just a fun musical that has, because of its historical context and where the origin of the story came from, the execution, and who directed it, Stanley Donen. I think that combination made it it makes it a really fun film experience. And that's what movies are supposed to be. They're supposed to be fun, especially films of that era. And I think it's a great film that, if looked at properly and just discussed maybe as deeply or not as deeply as we've discussed it today, people will understand that and see that it is a forward-thinking film in terms of women's rights and women fighting their oppressors, because as much as they could at that time. And I think it's fun. And I think that's because of all those things, all those separate small elements and touches are what's made it survive. Because there were a lot of musicals made. There were a lot of musicals made in the 50s, 30s, 40s that you don't talk about, that you don't see, because, as you said before, we've all mentioned some that just weren't good, and they didn't have that kind of subtext. And I think the subtext of that film, along with everything else, is just going to help it survive throughout the test of time.
I agree. Well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thanks for having me.
last-
Thanks for having us.
Hi, if Hisato's cool with it, I would love to have you back, because we try to do this if not every Wednesday, then every other Wednesday. I still haven't finished cutting together our That's Entertainment interview because I've been very naughty.
Oh, you know me. I love it. So if you guys want to have me on, I'll be on as much as you want. I'm, so there's a camera. I'm there.
Well, one last thing I must add is the fact that the Seven Brides, Ty was speaking of the aspect of the importance of the film, and it is what it is now because of what you said. However, at the time, it was just a fluff. It was just going to be another fluff. It was just going to be a throwaway because the people didn't have any. I mean, it almost didn't get the green light for it, and also the budget was taken away to put into Brigadoon. Although Brigadoon didn't go to Scotland like they wanted to because of Seven Brides. So Kelly hated Seven Brides, I'm sure of it. But then again, because of the subject matter and everything, it became a runaway hit, and that's the film that went to Radio City Music Hall, not Brigadoon. So more reason for Kelly to hate Seven Brides. And as we discussed before, Brigadoon is not a bad film if watched in widescreen. On TV, it loses about 60% of the charm. Everything. It does. And despite the fact that we had now I will say this, and it could be controversial, the sex symbol of the dancers, Sid Charisse, at her prime, looking gorgeous in Brigadoon. Despite all that sexual element there, it was not a sexy movie. And I'm sorry, but no matter what age the film is, so look at all the silent movies. They're so sexy, all of them, before the production.
Well, the problem is Sid Charisse is really sexy, but Gene Kelly is not.
I thought he was,
but his character in that is not sexy, and neither is Van
True,
Johnson. So their characters in it are dull. And the people in Brigadoon are interesting, and that's a problem because now you have a dull center.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes total sense.
So what I'm hearing is we're talking about Brigadoon next.
We could. Anyway, thank you.